asking questions is the single most valuable thing I think that you can do as a strategist. Typically the projects that I will work on for here would come between like 60 to 40K. If designers are not working out what the compelling part of the offer is, then they're just making something that's attractive. The strategy is just working out what perceptions you want to create in the minds of the people that are going to interact with you, and then putting together a plan so that your image and your actions are geared towards achieving them. Yeah, I mean, it's all about the money, isn't it?
Richie is an independent brand consultant and has started Brand Strat. You've also run workshops all over the world, right? Mm-hmm. A few different cohorts online.
Yep.
And you've been a speaker at Process Melbourne, which is awesome. I'd like to take a step back and really get your summary and like overall thoughts on what strategy or brand strategy is. Can you like give a definition that you found that resonates more than, the 1,000 definitions that we've seen online?
Yeah. I mean, there are like, everybody has their own definition of brand and branding and brand strategy. And it's like this kind of never ending kind of, fight, isn't it, for people saying like, oh, it's not that, it's this, and that definition doesn't encounter this. I have ones that I go to, and I often will talk about it in certain situations with the client, whereby there might be people that are in the room that are have their own assumptions as to what we're doing when we're discussing brand. So I would always go through, and my definition, and they're not even like unique to me, I think I just stole them from someone. Brand being the sum of the perceptions that are held about you, your company, or your products. Branding being anything you deliberately do to alter those perceptions. So deliberate being an important word. You could have a big scandal at the office Christmas party, might change perceptions of the brand. We won't call that branding. So it's all like some of the perceptions, branding, anything you can do to change those perceptions. So then if you go like, well, where do people form perceptions of your brand? Like, where are they actually kind of interacting with something, looking at something, buying something, experiencing something, hearing something to form the perception? And it's like, it's in so many different places when you create a brand. It's in, the design of your identity and your products, but it's also in how much you cost. It's also in who you partner with, who you support, your comms, your messaging, the culture you have, the kind of people that you hire. So there's all like these million different things, maybe not a million, but there's lots of different things where people draw perceptions from. And so when you're creating those things, if you don't have something that's guiding how you go about doing that, then how are you going to make the decisions on how those things come together? And I always feel like I talk about this idea of like the 6 pillars of perception. I always say it sounds like a shitty Harry Potter spin-off, but there's like your image and your action. So image is like what you look like, what you say, and how you sound. And then action is what you do, what you've done, and the experience you provide. So when you meet somebody new, like it or not, you're drawing perceptions on that person based on their image and their voice and what they tell you. And then when you learn more about them, what they've done in the past, what their views are, how they make you feel when you're sitting next to them, that's you. The sum of the perceptions will kind of make you think like, Mark's this kind of person, Richie's this kind of person, I perceive him in this way. And for a brand, it's all of those different touch points. So for me, that the strategy is just working out what perceptions you want to create in the minds of the people that are going to interact with you, and then putting together a plan so that your image and your actions are geared towards achieving them. So that's my definition of the strategy. It's really informing all of the decisions that go into making all of the touch points that form the perceptions of the brand.
And so as an outtake that you, like when you present it, do you summarize it? Like, hey, this is who we are, what we're going to do, this is how we're going to reach that? Or do you think that it still needs like the 100-page deck that it always has?
Like, isn't in terms of like when I'm presenting brand?
Yeah, brand strategy.
When I'm presenting the brand strategy, I generally feel like the presentation of the strategy itself, like even like the strategy, like working out what perceptions we want to create and putting together a plan so that your image and your actions are geared towards achieving them, that can look like a whole load of different things. And I try to make sure that the work that I do in terms of creating strategies and narratives for brand it's never the same process and it's never the same output. It's never the same deliverables. Sometimes there's like a kind of a core of what the approach would be, but you should always change it. And what one person needs as a narrative for their brand versus what another organization needs for the narrative of a brand, it shouldn't be locked in. You know, like if somebody says like, my framework for a brand strategy is whatever, like whatever they call it, like an essence, a value, a pillars, like whatever names they give to the sections of the story. If you go into a project with a predetermined idea about these are the sections of the story that I'm going to write for this brand, how do you know they even need that section? Right. How do you even know that they need this part? They might need a completely different section. So I never predetermine what the actual deliverables will be. I kind of say that, you know, we're going to be answering questions about who you are, what you do, who you're here for, what you're about, what do you care about as a team. It doesn't really matter like what you call those sections, but it changes all the way through. So the actual presentation of the strategy is different for every project as well. And often you're not delivering everything in the one strategy presentation. You've already kind of like you've already presented in a way, just like through multiple conversations that you've been having. You've already like kind of talked about this thing in a workshop. You've already had this discussion after the workshop. You've already made a recommendation here. So it's not like, you know, there is no strategy and then bang, we're in a room presenting to everybody. There is one and it's completely new to them. They're kind of brought up along the way. So what they're seeing in the strategy isn't like a surprise. It's just a culmination of all of the different process of getting them to a point or working with them to get to a point themselves. So it's not like this out the blue, wow, I didn't know it was going to be that. It's I find it's better to do it like gradually, like step them into what it's going to be and what it needs to be along the way.
Mm-hmm. So do you try to avoid a big reveal, or is that still in some ways included?
No, I think with the narrative, like with the words and the messaging and the story, I'm always for a big reveal. Okay. You know, I'm always for a big reveal in everything. I think, you know, like sometimes people like, you know, we don't do a big reveal. We don't do a big ta-da moment. It's very culminative. You know, we're the client's in on it all the way, and like that can work. Obviously, you know, like how you run your projects and your processes. But I think that sometime, you know, at some point, people need to hear the story of the brand that you've written. Like, what is the narrative? What is those words that kind of describe the brand in a new way or in a different way? Like, what is that section of writing that takes what's compelling and makes it attractive? Like, what does that look like? Mm-hmm. Like, if you don't reveal that in a big reveal, well, how are you gonna reveal it? Just email them snippets or like send them a text of the line or something like that. No, I always think that there needs to be a point where they're like, we love that. And if that's not new, then they're not going to have that instant reaction to it. Mm-hmm. And for it to be new, it needs to be a reveal, right? I think. So yeah, I put a lot of attention into making everything final, at least to the point where I think all of the writing is final, and doing a proper like presentation of it. And finishing with I always like to finish on like the kind of line, because a lot of people want the line that describes their brand in the shortest form, call it a master brand line or tagline or strap line. I think that sometimes people overlook how important that small piece of writing is. It's the toughest thing to get to.
Yeah, because that's like the tip of the iceberg and everything else follows, even the stuff that you don't see.
Totally.
Right, so that's underwater.
Yeah.
But that tip. So when you do get to that point, and you're presenting the narrative, doing the big reveal, do you have other variations, or is it just one that you run with?
Just one.
Okay.
Yeah, just one. Because like the line is the summation, a creative expression of their differentiator. And their differentiator is based on the positioning. The rest of the narrative needs to somehow fit with that positioning, with the character and the tone of the brand brought in on top of it as that kind of layer of voice or tone of voice, or if you wanted to call it that. Just needs to be something that you read that kind of sounds right, sounds fitting. And yeah, like why would you kind of go, here's 3 different versions of that most important piece? There's always one. You know, there's always one. I think it's the same with like design concepts as well. Okay. I'm not for presenting more than one design concept.
Okay.
I think it's like there's always one really good one. The other two are just sad little versions of that one.
Okay, because I'm on the other side of that.
All right.
Whereas I do present multiple, usually 3.
Right.
But I've heard many others, including other speakers at Process, say they only do 2 and some only do 1. Why is it that in writing you don't present more than 1? Because you think they're just not quite up to the level? And follow on from that is, because you sort of just said that actually, is do you get feedback where it's like, oh, this isn't quite right, we need to tweak it? Like say that master brand line. Or is it always like home run?
Honestly, it's generally, if I'm presenting it and I've booked it in, I've not had one that hasn't been, that they haven't liked. I've not had one where they're like, we don't like that. I did have one whereby they liked it, and then 2 weeks later I got an email saying like emergency tagline taken or something, and one of the competitor, it wasn't like a direct competitor, but it was somebody else within the industry, had the exact same brand line, brand like tagline. I'd never come across it. So I was like, shit. So then you had to go back and do another one. But no, they generally don't give feedback. No, I feel like if you've done a good job, and if you've done a good job in the process leading up to the presentation of the story, so worked out what's compelling, taken them through the positioning, talked about who they're going to speak to and what's important to them, made a whole recommendations, the narrative that they're seeing, like the way that story is told through words, again, it's like they're in a place where they kind of know what it's going to be. They just haven't seen it all put together. Right. So sometimes I do get ones where it's like, we're not sure about this word. This word doesn't feel right. But no, generally I put a lot of effort into not making it like a 60% thing done that I'm looking for feedback and collaboration on. I personally, how I approach it is I want the whole thing to be written, and then I don't want it to change. I don't want it to change. Like it does change in terms of like it gets expanded upon and cut up and broken down. But no, when I present back the stories and narratives and the lines and manifestos and stuff, I generally, like, touch wood or whatever, they're liked. Like, but because you know that they're right. And you don't present it unless you know that you've got a real great final line for the brand.
What I've read and sort of examined through that is it's also the journey in the expectation management. So they're not like, oh, wow, this is new to us and this makes sense, but, you know, fill us in on the back. Sounds like you're doing all of that background work leading up to it. So they've got an idea already. Would you say, like, how likely do you think they typically are to go from the previous meeting to the one where you present and they're like, oh, this is pretty much what we expected? Not in terms of the final words, but this is the direction we expected. So it all sort of fits well. We love it.
Yeah. I mean, like there's definitely portions that they expect, like, because when I present back a phase of my project, which I always do, which I think is the most valuable part, is, I mean, I call it a playback. It's like a kind of like an old term. It's like a kind of old corporate term. But I'm not one of these people that should, like, you're like, oh, that sounds like an old term. Let's create like a new word for it. This is our whatever, like our vision connection, reconnection session or something like that. It's like, no, just call it a playback, for God's sake. So yeah, in the playback, I would be like, one of the portions would be a recommendation over what the position is going to be. And I try to boil it down to one word. It's not like whether it's about like partnership or efficacy or uniqueness or a focus on detail. Like you always kind of tell them at that point what you're going to build the story around. And so the line that they see at the end isn't new. It's just a creative way of saying that positioning.
Right.
So it's not a surprise. Other stuff in the narrative can be a surprise, you know, the way that the story is told, but generally it's everything that they've told you, you know, like it's back to that point about like listening, asking the right questions and then listening, and not trying to just make up your own stuff to like force into them, really just reflecting back what kind of brand this feels like. I mean, it is slightly different for me because I don't work on what you would call like global brands, or so a lot of the time that people I'm presenting back to are the people for whom these brands are their life. They're their businesses, the organizations that they've started or that they are central to. So I find like, you're almost kind of trying to pull out what's emotionally, or what they feel as well, and what's emotional for them. Because if you try to force something for a brand owner or a business owner that they don't feel resonates with them, you need it to resonate with the audience, but you also need the internal team to get behind it and to feel like, yeah, that's what we're about. Because if you present something that isn't what they're about culturally, internally, business strategy wise, like it's going to be hard for them to kind of then get it and carry that forward comfortably and willingly.
Yeah, it's like that element of different or unique, but still familiar, right? Like that familiar has to be there. And were you at the third Process Melbourne event where the second where Alex James presented?
No, I was away for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was away for that.
Because what he talked about was super interesting, with perspective being your product rather than just the niching downside. But what he uses to get that, what the business is about with founders and business owners, is he just talks about the things that they disagree with in their industry. What are things that, your competitors would never do that you do, and perspectives that you hold that, go against the grain. Yeah,
because you're pulling out like part of their outlook, their perspective, their views. And like, if you can channel that back into the way that like then reflects those views back out, that resonates with the audiences that you're trying to speak to. It's like, you've given them something that is them and that they can then carry on and feel comfortable carrying on.
So have you found the same thing, like trying to get that unique perspective or what they believe that's deep rooted, that you have to find something that they typically disagree with in their industry or they stand up and against? Or is it slightly different for you when you're trying to get that compelling aspect of their business?
Sometimes it's not about what they stand against, but it's just like, it's what they're about. So it's not about what you do, it's about what you're about. I often say that. And for example, like working on an organization that's like a kind of a children's and family charity, a center for children and families from disadvantaged positions. And you're not going to ask them like, hey, what other charities are out there that you think are doing it wrong that you stand against? But in order to kind of like reflect what this organization is about and what it needs to be about, you ask them more like, what are you doing? Like, what's your approach to care? Like, what's your approach to social work? What's your models of like putting creative workshopping into, like, what are you trying to achieve with these families? Like, what do you think these families are lacking? What do you think these kids need? Like, so you almost like kind of, you don't necessarily have to kind of match it against what they are combatant against. It's more like what they support or what they like or how they operate. Sometimes that comes to the front. But like that's perspective as well. But I can see how you might get a sharper perspective if you marry it off against like what is not your perspective. What do you not stand for? That's a good question to ask as well.
Yeah. It makes me, it's one of the things I ask all the speakers for Process Melbourne as well. Now, it's like, what's something that you stand against, or what's an issue you have with the industry, the process? So I don't think I asked you that when we first started
really?
speaking.
I was going to ask you, what did they say?
Somehow, it depends who they are, of course, and the discipline they're in. But since I didn't get to ask it to you back then, I'll ask it to you now. What's an issue that you see in the industry of brand or brand strategy, or something that you stand against or stand up for that most others might not?
Well, I mean, I think I definitely stand up for the process of research and understanding before getting to advice and recommendations. So, I had a meeting like not that long ago where it was like a large brand, like a 300 people organization, and you're speaking to people about, what they should do. And there was kind of like pushback or questioning of, not necessarily pushback initially, about, me wanting to speak to clients, internal teams. And so I'm always kind of standing up for the need to get your head into the brand before you are expected to come up with something good.
Yeah.
And if you're not allowed to do that, or you're withheld to do that, but then you're still held to account for producing something good. So I'm a big kind of believer in staying firm on your approach and your process, and not kind of like, because generally the approach would be, my approach or somebody else's approach might be like, okay, we don't need to do that. Yeah, if you're not up for that, if that's too difficult, if you don't think that those people need to be listened to, we'll just pull that way.
Yeah.
There needs to be firmness. There needs to be some form of like commitment to what you know and why you believe that to be the right way of doing things. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that maybe creative industry fold too much on that.
Yep.
Like bending over to somebody else's process and then not liking the output. There's none where the client wouldn't let us do this. I'm a bit against that as well.
Yeah.
Client bashing. The client wouldn't let us do this. It would have been much better if the client, the clients ruined this work or whatever. It's like, well, why? Like, how has it got to that point? Generally, you probably find that's because you kind of you crumbled, or you didn't stand up for what needed to be done. So, I mean, I get it. Like that. The ability to do that and the confidence to do that only comes, I think, with time. Like there'd be times in my career where I would be at a meeting and be, you're like sitting in like early meetings and like people are having discussions around. You're like, I have nothing to say here.
Yeah.
Like what do I say? Mm-hmm. And the conversation's going on, and then you leave the room not having said anything. It's like, well, why the hell was that? What was Richie doing in the room anyway?
Right.
So being comfortable in being in a room and talking about things, and knowing like that what you say doesn't have to be like, it can just be being comfortable knowing that what you say isn't going to be something that makes you feel like you need to have so much pressure that it's the right thing or whatever. But I think that like, when you do get to that point of being more confident in saying things, you should stand up for what those things are a bit more.
Well, yeah, because that's what I found as well. Like starting out, being in the boardroom, being in the meeting is like exact same. I don't know what to say. I don't even have my own opinion at that stage.
Yeah.
And I think it does require a lot of absorbing before you can say, hey, objectively, this is what I think. And I found that after having a year break, or I think it was 6 months break, I came back to projects, and it was no longer, what does the marketing manager want? It was, what do I think? What would I do if it was up to me? Mm-hmm. And that took a while. It took about 2 or 3 years to get to that stage. And it was like, oh, trust your instinct. But you have to I had to have some runs on the board before I got to that stage.
Yeah.
Put that forward. And that's when my career really started taking off.
Yeah.
Is when I could introspectively say, what was it that I would do if it was up to me, rather than up to somebody else. Mm-hmm. And so finding that, voice in the boardroom took a little bit of time, took a little bit of absorbing, like what's the lay of the land here? How does it go about? But I'm curious, what's your feedback or advice to somebody who is starting out in design or strategy to get to that stage? Do you think they need to like absorb more, or do you think, hey, get your voice out there, just say what you're thinking?
I mean, it does depend on the kind of cop-out answer, but it does depend on the person. Like if you are like, it is better to start if you feel like your contribution is valid and should be heard, but you're scared of saying it. I would try to break through that barrier and look for points to say it. Mm-hmm. But in the same breath, like sometimes, the expectation on different people at different levels of their career to be saying things like, shouldn't go into every meeting thinking that, I need to own this room.
Right.
I need to make it, people go, oh, that guy said something and that's smart. What is it? Like fools speak because they have, was it? Wise people speak because they have something to say, and fools speak because they have to say something.
Right.
So don't feel that, if you're not at that point in your career or your profession where, don't throw at something for the sake of it, just to be like, I had a voice, but do start to be like, form opinions before you go in and have a point to contribute to them. But don't feel like sometimes I feel like, maybe your role or your purpose in being that room is to kind of just be a support, pick up things that were said. Generally in my role at that time, I wasn't kind of there presenting strategy or doing any strategy work. I was there like project managing, account managing, copywriting, like different roles that I had within that project. So yeah, if you feel comfortable and you feel like your voice isn't being heard, but you think it's valid, push for opportunities to say it. Yeah.
And you got into brand strategy through words, right? Like that was your avenue, and there's lots of different avenues.
Yeah.
Is that something you'd recommend for, the student or the emerging creative who's wanting to get into brand strategy, but doesn't have that clear pathway? Like even now, it's not a clear hierarchy or ladder to get there.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, words is definitely one way in, because strategy is words. I think somebody else's book is called Strategy is Words. And writing as a skill, I think, is really important. I think if you can, because at some point the brand needs to be defined. And yeah, it's defined in all of the actions that it has and the way it looks, but it's also, prior to that, it needs to be defined and documented in words. So words are a way in. They were for me. It was like journalism, copywriting, creative strategy. Like that was the kind of role, like the path that I kind of put in. So yeah, I think that writing is a difficult one though, because it's like a lot of the time, being a better writer is, I don't know if it's like saying to me, like, Richie, like, learn to be a better designer. And like, I'm not a designer. Sometimes like some people are better writers than other people. Sometimes people are good at some things and not the others. So you don't have to kind of force yourself into writing if you don't, if you don't think that you have a skill in it. But like writing is so important, like the way that you write also helps articulate your ideas. Yeah. I heard somebody talk the other day about, it was about that creative process, about, not jumping into a visual starting point, like going to mood boarding, going to photos and stuff, and just sitting as a designer and writing out like what the problem is, what the view is on it, what this note here, and then you just end up with this like collection of your thoughts articulated in words. And you'd be surprised at how rich I feel that is a resource for that to maybe start to kind of form a strategy anyway. It's basically just like writing down what you think of a brand and then presenting it back to somebody at some point and then making recommendations on how you go about executing it. So do you write much in your projects?
Yeah, I do a bit of writing.
Yeah.
I did start with like the nouns that some designers recommend, before you get to the design stage. It's like, what are the things you're trying to hit? But it is a lot more about, I find the conversations to be the most valuable, and then take down the notes from there. Because like strategy and workshops are very bloated ways of like, I find just saying what is like, how are we going to achieve what we need to achieve? Right. And so just having those discussions, whether it's on a WhatsApp group or in person, is so much less pressure than in a workshop. So there's a lot of things we do in workshops that are valuable, but I just find that the new way of doing things is so much easier. It's like, just jump on a call, have a WhatsApp, have a chat, like over a beer or something. It's so much more candid, and you get the real thoughts. They start to come out. It's like, oh yeah, we hate this, or we love this, or our competitors are doing these things and we need to like really watch out for them. Okay, tell me more about that. Like, what is it in particular that you're worried about? And I just find that way creates a lot more of it's a down to earth foundation that gets you to the real thinking, and then like design or the strategy can emerge from that. Yeah,
I think that the thing you said about like what else, like I was listening to a guy, I think his name's like Michael Barron, MBS is his like acronym. He's like a kind of coaching.
Michael Bungay.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah. The coaching habit.
Right. So I've not read The Coaching Habit, but I was listening to some of his talks and like, yeah, he's amazing. His one was like, what else is the most powerful tool that you can have as somebody that's working in anything really, working as a consultant, working as a creative, trying to guide people through things. Yeah. What else? Tell me more about that. And what else are things that I always say in my in my research interviews. Like I'll have a set of questions that I will ask people, but you can't just like expect them to answer one thing and that being the only thing that they have to say about that. So yeah, forcing them to go, what else? And then they go back, they go into their mind and they're like, what else about that? Because they have more things to say.
Yes.
It's not like a kind of, you know, here's a question, there's their answer, on to the next one, there's their answer, on to the next one. Push them to get more, like drain slightly, like squeeze out, because I feel like if you force them to think, they're tapping into places in their head that are slightly deeper. And like, that's really, again, like that's what you're doing. That's what he says as well, is what you're doing is like helping people figure out things themselves by just asking questions. What else? What else? What ideas have you had about that?
Yeah, and he's got a 7-step, I think it's 7 questions.
7 questions, has he? Yeah.
Which are similar to what you said, like what's your biggest challenge? And then people will sort of say what the challenge is. He'll then go into, okay, now what's the real challenge?
Yeah, what's the real challenge?
And that'll bring something else to the table. You know, what is it that you're thinking of doing? I think it's something like that. And he goes and,
I'll have to read that. I have one at the end, which is always the one I end on, which is, what do you think should be the objectives of going through this brand project? What would you like to see happen when we get out the other end? Because that stops them and makes them think. Because they might think like, I don't have a say in what this brand project is. I know I work in finance, or I'm part of the product team. I'm not involved in this brand project. But if you invite them to put forward something that they want out of it, they might be like, well, I'd really like to be able to kind of feel comfortable having something where I know exactly what it is that we do. You'd be surprised at how many people ask for that. So that means that when you put together the output, that goes back to my point about how all strategies and deliverables and outputs of a strategy should be different, because you've got to ask people what they want from this project. And if you ask 10 people across a business what they want from it, and then you go back and you say, you know, I think we should do this, this, and this. People are like, yeah, I want that. And yes, I want that. And yes, I want that. You're really giving them something that they actually want, because you've asked them what it is that they want. So yeah, I always finish my interviews on that, you know, tell me what else, tell me what you'd like to achieve, or what you'd like to get out of going through this.
And from your talk, I also really loved the question that you asked. I don't know if it was in that set, but you also say, what are you worried about, or what are you most concerned about with the project?
Yeah. That's the other thing. That's the other one. I tend to ask that in the workshops. Okay. It's that idea of like fear and desire, because, you know, what do you want to achieve out of this project? Gives them the opportunity to kind of say, yeah, I want this and I want this and I want this. And so you get this big like list of things. And sometimes you might put them into the scope that you're doing. So again, you're like compiling a customized deliverable scope for this next phase of work that you're going to do. But then the other one, which you never ask, or they very rarely get asked, is what are you worried about? You know, what are you worried will happen? And that kind of puts forward all this stuff about, oh, you know, I'm worried we're not going to get sign off. I'm worried it's going to take too long. I'm worried we won't like it. I'm worried that we shouldn't be like embarking on this without bringing in these people. So you invite people individually, and that's why I get them to kind of write it down individually rather than saying it to a group, because people are more comfortable. Different people have different ways that they like to contribute in certain settings, workshops being one of them. And so you have to do exercises and activities that accommodate for the different ways that people like to learn, and also the different ways that people like to contribute. So if you'd said to the group, hey, what are you worried about? You might get some person put their hand on, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that. Other people would be like, I'm really worried about this, but they're involved in that, so I'm not going to say anything. Whereas if you get them to write it down individually, there's a level of consideration and time that you're giving them without the kind of the stage that they feel nervous or they feel reluctant to step on. So yeah, what they're worried about allows you to go, shit, I didn't know that was a problem, or talk to how that isn't going to be a problem, or help them resolve that problem.
So one of the areas that I find doesn't get talked about enough and is taboo is the pricing side, both of projects from like the consultant or the agency,
Yeah.
but also the budgets of clients. They usually like they hold on to that until you give them a number, and then they're like, oh, that's out of our budget.
Yeah,
Or,
yeah.
that's great. And you're like, oh, I should have charged more. So I'm curious about it with you. How do you go about like pricing your projects, and what was it, when you started out versus now?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's all about the money, isn't it? So I have a few thoughts on like scoping and costing and pricing. I think ultimately you have to talk about money super early. I mean, like most people will say this that you speak to, but you have to talk about money super early. People don't, because I think maybe culturally they don't like talking about it, but they tend to be afraid to talk about money because they don't like talking about money, or they think that will end this opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so they'd rather like keep this opportunity, iron in the fire, but you can waste so much time like going down and doing work to pitch, propose, and get to a point where you reveal the cost and somebody's like, nah, that was nowhere near.
Right.
So I would always be like, if you get an inquiry or a call in, or there's a setup or a meeting or whatever, then at the end of the project, at the end of the initial chat that you're having about the project, and that's when you're not like saying anything about, this way I do it. I'd have one call where I'm just asking them questions. And then at the end of it, I'd be like, okay, have you put an investment to this yet? Have you put a budget to this yet? And if you haven't, what kind of figure were you thinking? And I think the second part of that conversation is important, because they can say, I haven't put a budget to that yet, which would be true. But when you say, but what, or if you haven't, what kind of thing were you thinking? And so that then stops them from going like, you want them to say it. They might say, we haven't put a budget to it yet, but then they might respond to your second part of the question and go, but I was thinking kind of like this. And then you've got a reveal already. It might be like way less than you've had. It might be in the ballpark you had, or it might be where you were hoping it would get to. Generally, what might happen there is that they would say, I don't have a budget set aside for it yet, and I don't really have an idea. So, we were kind of looking to you. And then what people will do, they might do is exit again. They'll crumble at that point. They'll be like, okay, so no problem. I'll just put forward what I think it would be and put the proposal together, and then we can take it from there.
Like email it through?
Well, I mean, generally, I would never email any proposal through, especially if it's got like finance at the end of it. But they might put together this big proposal, real like customized. They'll write intros and they'll write bios. That's the other view I have, actually. I don't think you should put anything in a proposal apart from the approach. I'm all for approach-only proposals. No work, no about, no team, none of that stuff. That's just my way of doing things, though. So they would put that together. They'd have another meeting, and then the budget would be revealed by them, and the client would be like, "Wow, that's way too much." So again, you've wasted all your time. So if you don't get the response to them from what their budget is, and you don't get a response to them about what you were thinking, you then have to bring the figure up.
Yeah.
You would have to say, well, obviously, we're fairly early in this part of the of just discovering what you need, but based on what I'm looking at the moment, typically the projects that I will work on for here would come between like 60 to 40K. And I think I always learned that you put the higher one first.
Yeah.
And they might go, oh, okay, well, and again, now you've put it out in the air. You put it out in the air, and they might then say, wow, we were thinking like 10 or like 5. And you're like, yeah, well, it's not that. And so at least you put it on the table. So have the discussion earlier on. Ask them the 2-part question: do you have a budget assigned to it? If not, what were you thinking in your head? If they say no to that, put forward your one. I do have a way of doing my projects whereby I don't scope the second part of the project.
Yes.
So I will have like a phases 1, 2, and 3, which is generally like researching, including all the interviews, workshops, depending on how many we need to do, and then this playback document. So once I've worked out how many interviews I need to do, and how many places I'm visiting, and how much material I'm looking at, and how many workshops I'm running, I know what that scope of that portion would be. So I would provide a definitive cost on that. but I don't yet know what the rest of the phases are. I don't know what chapters of the story they need. I don't know what we need to tackle in the actual strategy. I don't know if they've got like these product brands or sub brands. I don't know if they're merging with or if they're buying this other brand and we need to tackle that. I don't know yet. It's like back to that point of like the output should be customized. So I would always be like, so portion 1 is locked in at like, I don't know, could be like between 12 and 20K. And then the second part of it, your strategy, your messaging, your brand, your playback, your messaging book, your operations of how we're going to deploy this in, that might come between like 40 and 20. And so once you get to phase 3 and you've done all of the work and you know what needs to be involved, then you provide them with a locked in cost. So I would always say that that's the best way to do it. Don't scope the whole thing because you're assuming that you know what they need. And you're also not allowing you to adapt the scope either up the way, or generally it's up the way because you've asked, what do you want to get out of this? We want a new website. We want a new sales collateral. Okay, cool. Well, that's going to be in your deliverables. So you're creating your own shopping list. So yeah, that's the way that I do it. I always make sure I have the discussion up front. I always lock in a scope for the initial portion and then I leave a ballpark for the other one. So yeah, that's how I kind of approach the money side of things.
Yeah, so I think I saw 30% roughly for phase 1 and 70 for phase 2.
Generally, yeah.
Something around that.
Well, over the overarching cost of the project, I think that like 30% should be donated to research workshops and playback because you're just asking questions. You might be designing workshops and you are putting together a document that outlines what you've done, what you've observed, what you think that means, what your recommendations are, what the positioning you think the positioning should be. I would say that that's about 30% of the overarching cost. And then the rest of it, depending on how big it is, would be about 70% of the overarching cost.
So when they say, okay, we don't know a budget, you let us know how much it is, and you say 60K to 40K, typically, is that, you're thinking that for both phases?
Yeah, it depends. Again, it should always cost the client. So, like if I'm working with a small, owner operator with a team of like 10 people versus working with a multi-office, 300 plus, 150 million plus revenue, venture business backed, like you're not going to, the value of the project to them is different to the value of the project to the person. Plus so you should cost the client. So it would be more, but generally I would say that it would be between like 60 and 40K.
Yeah.
But if it's a bigger project, you might be like, this looks like it's a lot bigger. So it would be between 100 and 80K.
And a lot of creatives, including I think yourself, as a brand consultant, will also work with agencies sometimes or other studios. Does that rate change if you're coming under their name? Or how does that work for you?
So generally I wouldn't come under their name. They would be like, we're going to work with Richie. He's going to do the strategy portion. I would scope cost as if it was direct to client and bill the client directly. That's more, I do it more that way than the other way, because if you're doing it the other way, I find it, I'm more used to having the financial conversations and the contractual conversations with the client rather than like with the agency. Most of the time the agencies are kind of like, yeah, cool, you just invoice them and then we'll invoice them when it comes to our part. So right. Sometimes you have to be mindful though, because that's why I always like to be involved earlier on in the process when I'm working with studios or agencies, because I don't want them to come and say, we've just won this project, we think that we need to bring you on for the strategy component. That means their budget's already defined.
Right.
And the more that I take of that, the less of the pie is left for them. So I would always try to be like, they say, hey, we've had an inquiry. We think that there's a need for a strategist in here or a brand consultant in here, and we would go in together. So then I'm not taking from a pre-assigned amount. I'm going there and costing it and scoping it and providing the value and convincing the client of the value of the strategy, and the agency isn't losing a portion of pre-assigned budget.
And then do they get a cut of that? Like, do you do like a referral
Like a
thing
kicker.
as well? A
No,
kickback?
I wouldn't do referral. Like I obviously do vice versa as well. So a lot of the time, the client I'm working with won't know yet or won't have assigned a creative or a design agency or a digital agency or a video production company. So a part of my process would be to recommend that they do that. Recommend that they do that with a good quality of provider. And then I would be like, go to this person, speak to them, check out these guys over here, check out this company, this studio, this agency over here. I think that they would do a good job. I only do that if I generally know them, because I wouldn't want to, I wouldn't want to endorse them if I didn't know that they would. I could endorse them because they look like they do good work, but they might not be good to work with. So I have to know that they both do good work and they're good to work with. But no, there's no like little envelope that gets to Richie's Dropbox. I want the client to pick independently. Right. There's no kicker. I stay out of generally I would stay out of the process of selecting agencies, although sometimes I would help them to kind of have a criteria of what to ask to make a call.
Right. And is that the same even if an agency brings you on and they're like, hey, Richie's, great at strategy. We've worked with him before. Is there anything in it for that agency or studio that refers you?
You mean above and beyond getting to work with me?
Yeah.
No, generally not. Like they wouldn't put a mark. They generally wouldn't put a markup on it because I would do everything myself. They don't have to like project manage me. They don't have to. Sometimes they would project manage that process, but I guess it helps them to win the project.
Right.
It helps them to know that hopefully. I feel that they would like to know that they're getting a good quality strategy as part of it. And they're just waiting in the wings for this project to come through to them successfully. Maybe they wouldn't have won it without somebody being a brand strategy consultant in the project. Right. But no, I don't think that there wouldn't be anything financial in it for them outside of their portion of the project.
Interesting, because that sounds really foreign to me, having been more involved in agencies and bringing in consultants or white labeling. It almost always seems like there's like a 10% referral if that type of work goes to somebody that you bring on. But you're saying it's mostly like goodwill, good vibes, like you refer each other type of thing?
Yeah, pretty much.
No, that's good.
Yeah. So you mean that like if somebody who's the 10% referral fee?
So like,
to?
Let's say I've got an agency and I'm like, okay, Richie, I've got some strategy work that my client would like. Would you like to come on board with it? Generally, I don't ask for a referral fee in that, hey, you can only come on board if you do a 10% referral fee. But it is pretty common that people do have that set up.
Yeah, I guess that would be more of like a kind of freelance contractor vibe. So I would potentially be, the agency might have their client and they'll bill the client for the work, but just get you to do it. So then...
Yeah, or that.
But no, my ones are generally like, they know that they don't have either the resources or the capacity to do the strategy component. So me coming on to do it just means that they win the project and the strategy gets handed over to them and they are happy with that portion. So yeah, I think it's like, what goes around comes around. That's why it's so important to have good relationships with people. Like I think that's the other thing in terms of, work is just like people work with good people. So your work can be amazing and your price can be right. But if you're different, if you're like 5K cheaper than somebody else, they're not going to pick somebody else because they're 5K cheaper if they liked you and they preferred you.
Yeah.
So I think that like a connection and being liked and them wanting to work with you as a person or as a team, I think that has a lot more power than somebody else offering them like a 10% discount on what they were charging.
Yeah, because that would assume that all other variables are equal and it's only price that's the difference.
Yeah.
Which is very, very rarely the case.
Yeah. And I think the last thing I'll say with the pricing thing is like pricing is positioning as well. So if you go around dropping your prices because the client asks or you think you won't win it unless it's done, a lot of the time you get referral work. So if you've built up a bank of clients that you've done cut rate deals on, what do you think that person who they're going to refer to somebody, and that you're going to have to give that person the same cut rate deal as them. So you set your own standards. So I would just be like kind of mindful of, knowing that your price that you charge is your positioning. And to get up an accrued ladder of charging more, you just have to give it a shot. You just have to at some point charge more than you would typically do or feel comfortable. Stuff goes up, like I smashed, I don't know why I did this, but I smashed my neighbor's window while I was like lawn mowing because like a rock hit it. And I had to get the glass repaired, and I'd smashed another window in my house 3 years earlier, right? And so when I phoned up the same, what do you call it, like glazier or whatever, he was like, 50% more expensive.
Right.
Same size of window because it's the same kind of house. And so I was just like, oh, Steve is the guy. And he was like, oh, it's a lot more. And he was like, mate, it's 3 years ago, And I'm like, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So, but as creators and designers, incremental increases because of like economy increases don't seem to factor in. So like incrementally put it up, jump it up. You'd be surprised. Sometimes I say to people, just triple your next quote.
Interesting.
See what happens.
Right.
If they go as too much, you'd be like, okay, well, let's see how we can work with it. If they go, yep, sign off, bang, you're up to the next like kind of bracket.
Yeah.
But stick to your guns.
So how did you get to the current bracket you're in now? Did you start?
I started like a lot lower.
Are you comfortable sharing? Like how long
I think
ago
initially, like maybe, I don't know, they weren't kind of full strategy projects, but I think when I first started going independent, I was doing it because I was working 4 days a week and doing on the side. So I think like I was doing like kind of strategy and narrative projects for like, I don't know, like 10 grand or 15 grand. So it was just like, because I was kind of like learning my way into being an independent strategist. And then, like you realize that like that's criminal, that you're criminally undercharging. And so the value that you bring is you do more successful ones and people like it. And you go, right. And I guess as an independent, it's slightly different because, I have a certain capacity. So if I take on a project, it means I can't take on another one.
Yeah.
And so as much as people might say, listen, we don't have this budget. And I'm like, oh, well, I could do it for that. But that means that I'm just banking myself up with projects. And when somebody else comes that potentially did have the budget for that I want to set it at, I'll be like, I can't. I've got my hands full with this like cut price project I did. So I find that's a way of, saying like, listen, me taking on this project with you means that I'm not taking on projects with other people.
Yeah.
But yeah, just be comfortable. I mean, like, I'm from Scotland. It's British sensibility of not wanting to talk about money, but yeah, people are right. I feel like the Americans maybe have like this other like kind of approach to money. That's a little bit more, I don't know, less hang-ups, less angst on it.
Stigma, yeah.
Yeah, maybe less stigma. But yeah, maybe in here and UK, they're a little bit more iffy on it. But yeah, just bring it up, talk about it.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing. Like there is the opportunity cost, but there's also the element of if you walk back your price, do you also reduce the deliverables as well? Like say that person you told to triple their prices, if they walk back their price, giving the same deliverables, do you feel like there's a bit of like, oh, you were overcharged, like that perception that could be formed?
I think like definitely if you need to get it in, like reduce the scope, don't reduce the cost.
Yeah.
But I'm also mindful of like I would say that, I'm not charging on time. Like I'm not saying it will take me this amount of work to do. I have a day rate of this. I'm not doing that. I never go like, I never work out what my day rate is and how many hours it will take me to do this. I'm judging on the value of the project. It's not value-based pricing. I'm not going like, how much is this worth to them? And I'll take 10% of that. I'm not doing that model. I think that model's like broken. But I am going like, I'm not going to charge for my time because if you are experienced and you get better at what you do it faster. So what does that mean? I charge less?
Yeah.
It's kind of age-old discussion. But I do think reducing the scope and taking things out does. It's not like it's not pushing you into it being a time-based project, but it is opening up dialogue that, like, I'm not just dropping my prices here. I'm trying to work with you to find a way that we can do this, and for me to feel comfortable doing something. But there's a cutoff point. You know, like, you can't just like drop down, because if somebody says, hey, we want to do a light strategy, like, there's only a certain weight that a strategy can come with before it just floats away and becomes pointless. Like, so again, stick to your guns on what it needs to be. Like, hey, I can't do this. You know, we can't solve what we're trying to solve unless we do this stuff. The other thing that I don't like is like tiered things. Like, here's a bronze, silver, and gold package. Here's a pro, super pro, and super pro package. Like
the fintech or software.
Yeah, that. I think it's fine for product purchasing. You're like, oh, I don't need this. But I feel like if you're a creative and you've got like, hey, here's my bronze package, here's my gold package. I don't know. To me, it looks amateur-y.
How so? Like, what is it in particular?
It's making you kind of productize your offering into a kind of like, hey, here's a pick and mix thing that I can put together. And if you want this one, that's fine. You choose that one. I'll do it for you. Like, I feel like it's putting the ball into the court of somebody too much to say, we need this. Whereas like the conversation should be like, we're trying to solve this. And then you go, well, in order to solve that, like, you need this and this and this. Right. Not like you've got 3 ways to do this and one's bronze, one's gold, and one's silver.
So that's like the doctor analogy, right? Like, you can buy things off the shelf, but you don't know as much as a doctor would know in terms of what they're going to do for you. So you're far more like in the camp of, no, have the consultation, get the diagnosis, and then the prescription from a person or an expert. Yeah. Rather than, here, let me just go, Google or ChatGPT what it is that I need. Yeah. Hope it works off the shelf for like a fraction of the price.
And I think it's so executional. Like, the things in there are like, they're line item things that are like essentially like, hey, you could have a 9-page website or a 15-page website, and this is like, well, how do you even know that I need 9 pages or 15 pages at all? And also, like, that kind of stuff, that kind of design deliverables, that kind of work is directly in the cutting block of automation and that swathe of work. So you got to move upstream. You got to move away from doing that kind of work. There's many different paths that you can move away from it. One is strategy.
I had a really impactful moment in my career when I first started, and I read somebody's tagline or master brand line, which was, I made things pretty. I make things pretty. And I just thought, wow, that's so clever. The way that they articulated it was so succinct. You get the vibe of what they do. And like 10, 15 years later, I'm like, that is the antithesis of what I want to do. It's the complete opposite. Yeah. I don't care about pretty. I care about effective. And so the aesthetics can be the channel towards effectiveness, but they're by no means the core of it. It's like, I would rather have something that doesn't look great, that performs, right? That changes behavior, rather than something that looks amazing or pretty and it doesn't do anything for anybody.
Yeah. I mean, I make things look pretty is like, it's like kind of not, it wouldn't be, unless you're doing it ironically. I make things look pretty. And my definition of pretty is this and this and this. I'm like, I really like, I'm not going to remember it now. Collins have got like a really nice line on their website that's something like value something or other. I'm going to kill myself. But it's like, it's the opposite of like, we make things pretty. Right. It's like value defined. I think it's value defined or something along those lines. And so, you need to move your business out of the chopping block, be considered for somebody that is the head and not just the hands, and having 3 tiers of packaging and deliverables. I know that people say that it's because they'll psychologically pick the middle one, but I think it sets a precedent for you being seen as like an executional hands person. Yeah.
And that's really when I know projects aren't going well, is when it goes from, hey, I'm so invested in this is like really important work, to, oh, there's that switch of, it's like, oh, we're we're just doing what the client wants. Like, just get it up, ship it off. It's not getting a case study. It's not whatever.
Yeah, we'll just do it. Yeah,
you have to avoid that flip, because that flip happens a lot, especially in agencies, where it's like, I'm disconnected. Where's the new thing that I can have impact and like, be heard on?
Yeah, and I imagine you do that a couple of times, and that becomes the culture and the reputation and the brand of the agency. Is that, you know, if you want something, just go to them and they'll give it to you, but you won't get anything outside of what you asked for.
Yeah, and that's tough, especially with like, you know, clients who are smaller or have less understanding about brand. But yeah, you have to do everything to avoid that. And sometimes that flip, you know, you got to fight and say things that, you know, feel uncomfortable or feel like, you know, it's easier not to. You know, it's easier to not try to persuade a client against something that they want. But the focus should be, does it serve the business? And so that's the way that we see it, is like, if this isn't serving the business, we're not really doing our job. You know, it's not the founder or the wife or the cousin that, you know, doesn't like purple or whatever it may be. It's, does it serve the business? And that helps to create a bit more of a considered focus.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think I agree. You know, I'm a big fan of what you're saying with like the tiered list means that they know what they need. And if they know what they need already, like, where do you really step in and have impact?
Yeah, you could just go somewhere else, and I would imagine that the person doing it doesn't want to run a business that's like that. There might be some businesses that do run like that, but I would say they're not long for this world.
You also talked there about the opportunity cost when you might take a project that, you know, is at a cut rate. Do you see that being a luxury of having enough leads and prospective clients in the pipeline? And if not, what's the solution for the person who's like, hey, I don't see any more leads coming in the pipeline. I will just have to take it, or otherwise I do nothing during these, you know, few months. Yeah,
I mean, I guess it's like, you know, you don't necessarily have to be stacked with projects to say that, listen, if I take on your project, it means I'm not taking on any other projects. So I'd say you wouldn't want to be kind of saying, listen, I've got no work on at the moment, so I'm going to agree to drop the prices. That's like, I guess it's a perception thing as well.
Right.
So, I mean, I would use that regardless of what you've got in your pipeline, be like, hey, you know, it just means that, you know, having a conversation about your willingness to, and this isn't you being immobile, but it's you having some kind of, like a position, like having a stake in your argument for where you want to get to on pricing.
Right.
It's just be like, hey, you know, like you want it to be at this level. I reduce the scope, but, you know, a little bit so we can meet in the middle. But you got to understand that, like, if I take on this project at this rate, it means I can't take on our other ones. It's just giving you like slightly like a kind of more a strengthened position to have your discussions over where it's going to land financially. You don't have to have that.
Right.
It doesn't have to be the reality.
They don't need to know.
Yeah. But yeah, I totally get it. You know, like if you need to earn, and you're responsible for your bills and your your costs of your living, then it becomes super scary if you are knocking back work because it's too low. But what's the other option is that you take on unprofitable work, or you take on work that you do that takes away your opportunity to do profitable work. So you have to be careful, and there isn't a definitive way to say always knock back work if it's under this. You got to look at the situation and profitability. You know, like financial profitability and opportunity profitability are different things as well. So, you know, look at the client. Is there, if you take on this work, will there be potential more from that client? Is it an area that you want to get into? Is it worth you taking a decision that you're going to drop down the percentage of profitability on it? But the minute that you drop it down, you know, where you're not earning, you know, like it's costing you more to operate that project than it is when you're earning, man, you do 2 or 3 of them in a row and you're gone.
Yeah. And I really liked your talk, but tell me a bit more about the 2-prong framework that you have, both compelling and attractive.
Yeah. Compelling and attractive. So yeah, often when you're kind of describing what you do, you could say it in very kind of practical ways. Like, I'm a independent brand strategy consultant. I conduct research, do workshops, put together frameworks, put together approaches, craft narratives. You can say all that kind of stuff, but like sometimes people are like, yeah, but what does it actually mean? And I always think that if I look at what I do and try to define it in a more, I don't know, practical human term, it's like I would help businesses and organizations, sometimes people, uncover the most compelling parts of who they are and what they're about, and then express it in a way that's attractive to the people that you want to speak to. Because when you're a brand or a business, you need to find out what the most compelling things are in order for people to pay attention to them or for it to resonate with them. Like something that's compelling is something that people are drawn towards. But at the same time, like you could find what's compelling, but not say it in a way that's attractive. So you could have a really like beneficial offering or a real part of your business that people would really get into. But if you don't express it in a way that they're like, that makes sense to me, I want to be part of that, I feel that, then, you know, you're just kind of going nowhere. So yeah, you got to uncover what's compelling and then express it in a way that's attractive. And I think that that's what the strategy is. Like strategy would be uncovering what's compelling, and then the writing part and the expression of that would be converting it into something that's attractive to the people that you want to speak to.
I've not heard of people describe it that way and discovering like what's compelling and then putting it together as an appealing way, an attractive way to express it. Is that something that you've created or discovered yourself? Or did that come from any parts of your journey where you'd heard people describe it that way?
I'm gonna like claim trademark on it or something. I hadn't heard people say that, but I guess like, you know, when you're looking at, because I'd worked as a creative director and worked in design agencies, like the attractive part, like the attractive for me is the messaging and the language. Initially, the messaging and the language, but attractive for designers would be like the visual attractiveness of it. But again, if designers are not working out what the compelling part of the offer is, then they're just making something that's attractive. And so you could be drawn to it, but then it might not make sense to you. It might not resonate with you. It might not connect with what the audience want. It might not be about what the audience's pain points are or what their motivations are. So yeah, I hadn't heard anybody talk about it in that way, but it kind of just made sense to me. And people understand it a little bit better. Like you can bombard them with all this kind of vernacular about your service offering, but if you just say, listen, we're going to help you and your team work out what the most compelling parts of your business are, and then express it in a way that's attractive, people kind of go, I get it. You know, like sometimes it's about about describing something to somebody in a way that they get. And so compelling and attractive was like just common terms that people would like. I get that.
Yeah. So there's the compelling. Tell me a bit about the way that that's different as well. Like, does it need to be different? You hear a lot about differentiation and distinct. Is that something you factor in when you focus on what's compelling? Like if other people have it or talk about it as well?
Not particularly. Like, I don't think that, people do talk about like, you know, it has to be different. You know, we have to be different. I don't think that's true. You know, like if you have a brand and a business, if you're offering something that is generally different, you have to like be coming up with some kind of like new technology or some kind of thing that doesn't exist yet. Chances of that happening are pretty small. So there are going to be other people out there that could claim an element of the story that you create that say, yeah, we do that as well, but they don't say that they do it. You know, like you could have you could have a business that operates quickly and efficiently, and speed and efficacy could be the things that you build the brand around. They say, yeah, but we're fast and we're efficient. You're like, well, you don't say that. And we're just going to claim that space. So it doesn't have to be something that somebody else couldn't do. It just has to be the thing that you decide that brand is going to own. You're going to hang your hat on that. You're going to build a story around it. So yeah, I don't think that there is anything like long-term differentiation isn't like, it's not sustainable long-term. So no, you don't have to be different. You just have to pick something that you can lay claim to and do it in a way that's different. You know, maybe express it in a way that's different, but the thing itself, it's easily claimable by other brands. They just don't do it.
So do you find that you start more with the audience and what's compelling to the audience of that brand rather than where a lot of people start, which is the brand's competitors, what's already being said and done?
I think both. I think I always would start with the audiences. Like if you're if you're trying to work out how to make a brand, or how to make what a brand is and what it's about, if you're trying to make that attractive to the people that you want to speak to, you've got to kind of work out what is attractive to them and what's compelling to them as well. So yeah, you have to do it based on what you're learning about the different audiences, because sometimes it's a brand that you might engage with, or you might buy, or you might sign up to, but other times it's something that you have never engaged with. So you're like, what's attractive to, I don't know, like brokers in an underwriting agency? No idea. But you learn by going to speak to these brokers and saying like, what's your, what's the biggest issue for you? What do you like from this? Like, yeah, you just listen and you learn from speaking to other people. I don't know how anybody does it. And I think that's I don't know how anybody does it without speaking to audiences. And like, that is one of the first starting points, I would say, if you are creating brands as a designer and wanting to kind of like start to like step a little bit upstream, is do interviews. And it's crazy to me how many people would say that, yeah, we built this brand for this audience, but we didn't speak to anyone.
Right.
We didn't speak to their clients. We didn't speak to any of the team. How could you not?
Right.
How could you not?
And so that's a big part of your process, is both speaking to your client and any stakeholders involved. At least, I think you said from your talk, at least a number of them.
Yeah.
But how do you approach it when you get to the client's client, so the end user? Is that something you request them to recommend who their audience is, or do you go out and find it yourself, or does it just change?
It depends on what the brand is. Like I'd say the majority of the projects I do would be like B2B. They're selling to, they're appealing to, or their audiences are businesses. So they have clients rather than customers. So in that case, yeah, you just say like, as part of the research, you'd start to like work out who the different audience groups of those brands are. And sometimes it might be like direct clients, like people that pay them for their services. Other times it might be secondary audience groups that they have. I don't know, it could be like a media audience group, or a supplier, or a partner that gets them the client. But yeah, if you just say to them, I want to speak to some of your clients, and I'd like to speak to some of your clients. I'd like to speak to some people in this group. I'd like to speak to some people in this group. And generally, they would be the ones that would be like, okay, I'm going to either contact the clients. That's what I say to them. I say, you go out, you contact your clients, say you're doing this brand project, say that there's Richie, this guy that's doing the strategy for us, and that he'd like to speak to you to learn your insights and opinions. They email them. I just come in on the back. They get the agreement from the client to do it. Then I email off the back saying, thanks very much for doing this. Here's a link to book our interview time, and you do it that way. So yeah, it can be more difficult if they have customers rather than clients, because they don't have a long-term relationship with their customers. But in that case, you can still get them to reach out to some of their customers and say, hey, would you mind, partaking in this interview process, research process? Generally, you have to kind of like bribe them in some way.
Yeah.
I don't know, with a voucher or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's easy to get them to set it up. And sometimes you kind of want to steer who you speak to as well. Like, make sure that you're not just getting people that are going to say how great this business is. So I always ask for like a range of people. Sometimes it's people that, I don't know, that used to use them but don't use them anymore. Sometimes it's people that, like, I don't know, maybe haven't been using them for a while, or maybe it's people that have used them but they have a really strong opinion. So you want to get like a kind of mix of different opinions coming in.
Right.
Because yeah, you don't just want cheerleaders saying how great the brand is. You really want to know like what's the issues. If your job as a strategist or a brand consultant is to eventually put forward advice, then you need to know what the problems are. And so you want to speak to people about what the problems are, not just hear them glow about how great the brand is.
Right. And so as an independent, it's interesting because you take more of a specialized role, but then you start having a few more generalized roles, right? Like this is in some ways what you're describing, more of like a generalized researcher type role. Are you doing that research by yourself all the time, or do you also hire consultants or others to do it?
No, I do all the research myself. Okay. I think that you could look to, if the project is big enough, you could look to engage like additional researchers, but there's not that many, like, unless you go to like a research firm, then I don't know if there's like lots of people that are like just working as researchers. And I always feel like if you don't do the work yourself, you're not plugging that bit in your brain with the knowledge that you need, that you get from immersing yourself in the portion. So yeah, I do all the research myself, all of the interviews, all of the audits, all of the analysis, all of the conversations with the internal teams. I do it all myself because I think that you got to like fill your brain, fill your head with as much knowledge as you can. And if you pass that off to somebody else, first of all, it's like a kind of financial thing as well. You know, like if you're operating as an independent, you kind of got to be like, okay, is this project scalable enough for me to bring new people in? But outside of that, I just feel like if you didn't fill your brain, because eventually like you need to like expel this information from your brain. So you got to load it up. I love doing the research. It's also the easiest part to do.
Right.
You know, like you can wander in there and be like contently clueless as to what is going on.
Right.
You know, like what's the challenges here? And you just sit and you just ask questions and nobody's expecting you or, you know, looking to you to come up with any kind of like solution at that point. You're just like, plus it's like super interesting. You know, like you just learn about people and businesses. You get to chat to folk. I think as work as an independent, like doing these research interviews are like one-on-one time with people. So I generally do them over like Google Meets or like video call. But yeah, it's just nice to chat to people, you know. Sometimes I like, you know, you'll meet somebody that like, I don't know, they could be like older or something and you end up like having a chat much longer. They're not talking about loads of different stuff, but yeah, the interviews are so important. Yeah, really important.
So tactically, what's like the minimum or maximum that you typically will handle? Like,
I mean, it depends on the size. It depends on the size of the brand and the size of the business. Like the more audience groups they have, the more important it is to speak to somebody that represents that audience group. And so if they have like, I don't know, multiple verticals of their business offering, if they have different territories that they're in, if they have different people involved in the kind of the chain of a sale or the chain of buying or engaging with the brand, then you want to speak to more. I'd say I try to do 10 internal, so speaking to 10 members of the team, and then 10 external interviews, like 10 clients or 10 customers. But you know, the bigger the brand, the more you can do. I have done like over 25 because it needed it. But generally, I feel like when you start doing that volume of interviews, you start to crop up. The same stuff starts to crop up. You know, I think that like anything over kind of 15, you're starting to hear the same kind of answers. But anything less than like say 5 is you're maybe not able to conclude that what you're hearing is not like is not isolated to that kind of person. Yeah. So you need to speak to like enough that you start to kind of hear the same answers and hear the same things. Sometimes I'll stagger them as well. Like you think that you do the research interviews as part of the research. You think that you do all of the interviews and then be like, right, I've pulled in all the information. But often I'll do like a portion of them while I'm doing the research, and then I'll leave interviews with some other people until post workshop or post playback, or while I'm actually kind of writing the strategy, because you learn more about the project as you go. So sometimes I think if you knew what you knew when you're later on in a project, at the start of it, you might ask better questions. Right. And asking questions is the single most valuable thing I think that you can do as a strategist, as a consultant, especially when people can get answers so quickly now. You know, what your job is really not to kind of like give them advice. It's to give them the opportunity to think about things themselves by asking them questions. You know, like, what is the biggest challenge at the moment? You know, what ideas have you got that's solving those challenges? You're just asking them questions and listening. Like, that's really what I feel a lot of my job is, just asking questions and then listening, being inquisitive, being curious. I mean, you must know, like, you've done projects where you don't know what you know until you learn from people. So you have to ask and just listen.
Yeah, I found that at the beginning, like a junior especially, feels like they need to have all the answers. And the more seniority and experience you get, the more comfortable you are without having the answers.
Yeah, that is true.
And asking the right questions. And so has that evolved over time for you? Have you noticed the power of questions through any certain experiences, or was it always the case for you even when you started out?
I don't think, like, at the start when I was doing, like, working in design agencies and doing brands and design agencies, I don't think that I knew that, like, asking people questions and listening to the answers was what they really want from you, what is the most valuable thing to them. Because when you're focused on the execution of an identity or a campaign or whatever, you're kind of like thinking that they're coming for you to solve a problem, and to solve a problem is that we need this solution. But if you're not even sure that problem might be the right thing for them to address. So I wouldn't say it's like, it just makes your job easier. It just makes your job easier if you're asking people for the answers, and it makes your eventual advice that you give forward not something that you're pulling out your air. You're just literally like reflecting back what they've told you. And the other thing that's valuable is like when you're working with a business or an organization, they haven't heard the answers from the other people within their team. So part of it is giving them the opportunity to talk and work out what is their biggest challenge, what ideas have they got to solve that. So it really forces them to think like, what is it that is my biggest challenge? And then you're able to play that back to them, and you're also able to play it back to other people within the team or the department or the organization. So people learn from you asking questions, and then they get to know the answers that somebody else is telling them, especially for like, I don't know, like a boss or a CEO or something, like to play back to them what their team or their staff are telling them is like super valuable, I think. But yeah, it's pretty revealing.
You mentioned before that one of your main questions is, what's your biggest challenge? I'm curious, what's your biggest challenge in this space and independent brand consultant?
What, you mean like professionally or personally? How long have we got?
Personally. I do think there is some, like, especially as an independent, there is a lot of overlap in that, right?
Yeah.
Personal and professional.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Answer at your own will.
Well, I mean, honestly, I think like one of them is like making sure that working as an independent doesn't shape you too much that you're not able to then kind of slot into teams again, because when you're working in teams, you have to be more cognizant of other people's emotions and actions, and how they're feeling and how you interact with them. When you're independent, you only really are interacting with your clients. You don't have team members to be interacting with. So yeah, I found it, unless you're then brought in to work in a team, and that's when I feel that you notice that you start maybe questioning yourself, like, because you get out of use, like you get kind of bit rusty, get a bit rusty into how, and you start questioning yourself, like, am I being too demanding here, or am I like getting too frustrated here that this isn't coming? So I think that's a challenge for me, is to make sure that, you don't become this kind of like prickly loner out in the that can't kind of re-engage with humanity again.
Sounds like you got a story there. What's an example? Have you got any examples?
I mean, like, it's just, I think it's like, nothing specific. It's just like, knowing that other people operate in different modes and methods to you, and being empathetic to that. I worked in teams for like years, and I don't think that, when I worked in teams, most people would say that I was, that I wasn't good at it, or I wasn't a good team member. I'd like to think that most people would say that. I have to ask them. But yeah, I think that, being solo, being independent, being kind of isolated in a way from a team, from colleagues, means that you have to make sure that when you are coming back into another team, you're not kind of operating the same way as you do when you're on your own.
Right.
You know, you're looking for more collaboration. You're looking for more touch points. You're not just being like, I don't need to. I've got it. I've got to go. So yeah, I think that's a challenge for me, is just making sure that, you know, you can slot back into a group when you need to.
And so that's a group like of teams you're working with, like when you get embedded in a project or.
Yeah. When you're getting embedded with a project, because sometimes, like I'd say about maybe 70% of the client of the work I do would be like direct with client. So it would be me that would be engaging the client initially, me that would be pitching, proposing, me that would be presenting, me that would be doing the entire project directly with the client. But I still do work when I still do some projects where agencies or studios might bring me in because they have a project that warrants a strategist or warrants a consultant, but they don't necessarily have that person in their team permanently. So yeah, those projects are where you have to come back in, and there's a project manager, and there's a design director, and there's designers, and there's developers, and so you're now in there as a strategist with them. And I do love both. You know, I think that it's nice. It's nice to be able to like come in and be part of a team again and see how different people operate their businesses and how they run their projects.
Yep.
And also see, that's the other thing I love about doing that, is that you generally know that when you work with those studios or agencies, you respect them and you respect their work, and you know that they're going to do a really good job in bringing to life whatever it is you've done the strategy. So doing that handover from the strategy work into the design development or into the start of the creative is when you kind of like you let your work go, and you then can kind of like, it's like a relay race, you know, you're kind of passing on the baton. It's not like you give it to them and they're completely gone. I do stay involved in the project post the end of the strategy, post the handover, but it's not your responsibility so much anymore because it's gone into other people's hands. And that's so cool to see, you know, to see the design process and to see creative coming back, to see them using the positioning, executing on the architecture, using the messaging. Like that's my favorite part of the job, like seeing the work come to life.
You've got a question from the audience, which is, why weren't you at TDC last week?
Oh man, I would have loved to have been at TDC last week. No, I know that you went there, and I spoke at TDC in 2024 maybe, and it's a really like amazing experience all in all. I think that the combination of the venue, the production, the lineups, the speakers, the space itself, but above and beyond that is just like the collection of people that go there. Matt, the guy that runs it, seems to have been able to like just create this really like nice, enjoyable atmosphere. I guess that's the best way to describe it.
Thank you for coming on. Check out Brand Strat as well.
We're
and
coming
Richie
back.
Meldrum.
We're coming back.
Show him some love, and
No, I think it's been great, man. I think like having this kind of conversations, either here or at the Process live events, I think that I've said to you before, you know, like we need, same as TDC, you know, we need places that people can go to where they can meet people in real life and they can experience an environment with other people there and hear from people. I think that we've been lacking that in here and in certain cities around the place at the moment. So to have somewhere where you can see people are totally drawn to it. That's why it's growing. And so, yeah, get down there if you haven't been.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man. Thanks. Whew. Cool.
I feel like I'm on a masterclass already.
Oh, really?